The café was too bright, too cheerful, and Clara Jenkins was going to murder her best friends the second she got home. She sat alone at a corner table near the window, smoothing down her navy dress for the 7th time, checking her phone for the 9th, and seriously contemplating whether she could escape through the bathroom window without anyone noticing. Rachel and Simone had insisted this blind date would be perfect for her. They'd been annoyingly secretive about the details, refusing to show her a single photo or reveal more than his first name. Daniel. That was all she had to work with. Daniel, who was now 12 minutes late, and Clara was beginning to suspect didn't actually exist. She was about to text her friends a strongly worded message when the cafe door opened, bringing with it a gust of cool evening air and the most beautiful man Clara had ever seen in her life. He stood in the doorway, scanning the room with an expression that could only be described as barely concealed terror. Tall and lean, he wore an expensive black coat over dark slacks and a charcoal sweater. But it was his appearance that made Clara's breath catch in her throat. His skin was impossibly pale, almost luminous in the warm cafe lighting, and his hair was a striking white blonde that fell just past his collar. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes so dark they appeared black from across the room completed the picture of someone who looked like he'd stepped out of a Gothic painting. He was also clearly having some sort of panic attack. Clara watched, fascinated, as he approached the counter, spoke quietly to the barista, and then turned slowly toward her section. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Clara felt something electric shoot down her spine. He looked away immediately, a faint flush appearing on those pale cheeks, and began walking toward her table with the posture of someone approaching the guillotine. Clara Jenkins. His voice was deep, accented with something old-world and European, and shaking just slightly. "That's me," she offered a warm smile, trying to put him at ease. "You must be Daniel?" "Draeven," he corrected softly, then seemed to realize how abrupt that sounded. "Daniel it's my middle name. My friends thought it would be. They said Draeven might be." He trailed off, looking mortified, and Clara's heart did something strange in her chest. "Draeven is beautiful," she said honestly. "Please, sit down." He did, moving with a grace that seemed at odds with his obvious nervousness. Up close, he was even more striking. His features were almost aristocratic, all elegant lines and refined beauty, but his eyes kept darting around the cafe like he expected something terrible to happen at any moment. His hands, long-fingered and pale, twisted together on the table. "I apologize for being late," Draeven said, his accent more pronounced now that Clara could hear him clearly. It wasn't quite British, not exactly Eastern European, but something older, something that tugged at her memory of history documentaries. "I have not done this I'm not skilled at—" He closed his eyes briefly, took a breath. "I am terrible at this." Clara laughed, the sound surprising even herself. "You know what? I'm terrible at this too. My friends ambushed me with this date, and I've been sitting here planning their funerals for the past 15 minutes. A small smile tugged at the corner of Draven's mouth, transforming his face from merely beautiful to absolutely devastating. "My companions did the same. They insisted that I have been too isolated." The smile faded. "They may have been correct, though I would never admit such to them. How long has it been since you went on a date?" The pause that followed was long enough that Clara thought she'd overstepped, but then Draven said quietly, 372 years. Clara blinked, then laughed again, assuming it was a joke. "Right, and I'm the Queen of England." But Draven wasn't laughing. He was watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle, those dark eyes boring into hers with something that looked like resigned sadness. "You think I jest?" "Well, I mean," Clara's smile faltered slightly. "Obviously, unless you've discovered the secret to immortality, which would be quite the first date revelation." A waitress approached before Draven could respond, asking for their orders. Clara requested a coffee and a slice of the cafe's famous chocolate cake. Draven ordered nothing, which the waitress found odd enough to ask twice if he was certain. He was. After she left, Clara leaned forward, intrigued despite herself. "Not hungry?" "I have a very specific diet," Draven said carefully, "and I ate before I came. I did not want to be distracted." There was something in the way he said it that made the hair on Clara's arms stand up. But he was looking at her with such earnest nervousness, such genuine anxiety about making a good impression, that she pushed the odd feeling aside. "So tell me about yourself," Clara said, falling back on the classic first date question. "What do you do?" Another long pause. Draven seemed to be choosing his words very carefully. "I am in governance, administrative work. Very old family business, you could say. It requires extensive travel and considerable discretion." "That sounds mysterious and important." "It is exhausting and often infuriating," Draven replied, and there was real frustration in his voice. "There are days when I think I would trade it all for a simple existence. No responsibilities, no expectations, no centuries of tradition weighing upon every decision." "Centuries?" Clara caught the word, tilting her head. Draven looked like he wanted to bite his own tongue. "It feels like centuries," he amended quickly. "When one's family has held the same position for generations, the weight of history becomes rather oppressive." Clara's coffee and cake arrived, and she took a sip, studying Draven over the rim of her cup. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Hunger, maybe, but not for food. Something deeper, almost desperate. "What about you?" he asked, clearly eager to shift focus. "What do you do, Clara Jenkins?" She grimaced. "Nothing as impressive as mysterious governance. I'm a librarian at the downtown branch. I spend my days helping people find books, dealing with the ancient computer system, and trying to convince the city that we need more funding." "A librarian?" Draven's entire demeanor shifted, warming in a way that made him suddenly seem more human, more real. "A keeper of knowledge, a guardian of stories and history." "That's a much more romantic way of putting it than 'I reshelve romance novels and tell teenagers to be quiet.'" "There's nothing more valuable than knowledge," Draven said with unexpected intensity, "than preserving the past so others might learn from it. I've known many librarians throughout my—" He stopped abruptly. "I have great respect for the profession." Clara took a bite of her cake, considering. Draven was odd, certainly. The way he spoke, his formal manner, the strange slips about time and centuries. But there was something compelling about him, too. A loneliness that resonated with her own, a sense that he was as uncomfortable in the modern world as she sometimes felt. "Can I ask you something weird?" she said suddenly. Draven tensed. "Of course." "Are you sick? I don't mean to be rude, but your skin is so pale and you're not eating, and you seem almost afraid of the lights in here." For a moment, she thought he might actually tell her the truth, whatever the truth was. His expression cycled through several emotions: surprise, consideration, longing, and finally resignation. "I have a condition," he said slowly. "It makes me sensitive to bright lights and requires a very restricted diet. It has been in my family for as long as anyone can remember." "I'm sorry," Clara said genuinely. "That must be difficult." "You have no idea," Draven murmured, then seemed to shake himself. "But I manage, and it does not prevent me from living a full life, merely a different one." They talked for 2 hours. Once Draven relaxed, he was fascinating. He spoke about art and history with the passion of someone who'd lived through it. He made references to events from centuries past with an ease that should have been impossible. He asked Clara about her life, her work, her dreams, and listened to her answers with an attention that made her feel like the most important person in the world. When the café began closing around them, Clara was genuinely disappointed. "I should let you go," Draven said, standing with that inhuman grace. "Thank you for tolerating my awkwardness. I know I am not the most conventional of companions." "I had a really good time," Clara said, and meant it. "Would you maybe want to do this again?" The expression on Draven's face was worth every second of awkwardness and uncertainty. Pure, unfiltered joy, quickly tempered but unmistakable. "I would like that very much." They exchanged numbers, and Draven insisted on walking her to her car. The parking lot was dark, lit only by a few scattered lamps, and Clara was grateful for the company. When they reached her modest sedan, Draven stood close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from him. Not body heat. Cold. "Be safe," he said softly. "The city is more dangerous than most realize." Before Clara could ask what he meant, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows with a speed that shouldn't have been possible. Clara sat in her car for a long moment, her mind spinning. Then she pulled out her phone and called Rachel. "Well?" Rachel answered on the first ring. "How was Prince Charming?" "Where did you meet him?" Clara asked instead of answering. "And why did you set me up with someone who I'm 90% sure isn't human?" There was a long silence. Then Rachel said carefully, "What makes you say that?" "Rachel." Another pause. "Okay, look, don't freak out, but Simone met his friend at a very exclusive club downtown, the kind of place that doesn't advertise and has extremely selective membership. They got talking, and apparently Draven's friends have been trying to get him to socialize for years, literally years. They thought maybe a normal date with a normal girl might help him." "What's wrong with him?" "Nothing's wrong with him. He's just... Look, he's from a very old family, very traditional, very private. He doesn't get out much, and from what Simone heard, he's been under a lot of pressure from his work. His friends thought he needed to meet someone outside his usual circle." None of that explained the cold, the pallor, the way Draven moved, or the strange things he'd said. But Clara found herself saying, "I like him." "Yeah?" Rachel's voice brightened. "He's gorgeous, right? Those eyes, that accent?" "It's not just that," Clara said slowly. "There's something about him, something sad, lonely. I don't know, Rach, I want to see him again." "Then see him again. Just be careful, okay? I'm sure he's a great guy, but we don't actually know much about him." After they hung up, Clara drove home to her small apartment, her mind full of pale skin, dark eyes, and a voice that spoke about centuries like he'd lived them. She didn't have to wait long. Draven texted her the next day, his messages formal and carefully worded, asking if she might be free for dinner that evening. Clara agreed, her heart doing an embarrassing flutter when she saw his name on her screen. He picked her up at 8, driving a sleek black car that probably cost more than Clara made in 5 years. He was dressed in another dark ensemble, this time a black shirt and slacks that made his pale skin and white hair almost glow. He opened her car door, helped her in with old-fashioned courtesy, and drove them to a restaurant that Clara had heard of but never imagined she'd actually visit. The restaurant was exclusive, dimly lit, all dark wood and deep burgundy upholstery. Draven had reserved a private corner booth, secluded from the other diners. Once again, he ordered nothing for himself, claiming he'd eaten earlier, while Clara enjoyed what was probably the best meal of her entire life. "This is too much," she protested when Draven ordered wine that she knew cost several $100s a bottle. "It is nothing," he assured her. "I want you to enjoy yourself. He hesitated, then said with quiet intensity, "I want to see you happy." "Why?" Clara asked, emboldened by the wine and the intimacy of the dimly lit booth. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Draven said. "I know you are kind and intelligent. I know you value knowledge and helping others. I know you made me feel, for the first time, in longer than I can express, like I was simply a man rather than—" He stopped himself again. "Rather than what?" Draven looked at her for a long moment, and Clara could see the war happening behind his eyes, the desire to tell her warring with something else, fear, maybe, or duty. "Rather than what others expect me to be," he finished finally. Over dinner, Clara learned more fragments of Draven's life. He lived in an estate outside the city, something his family had owned for generations. He had responsibilities that kept him working primarily at night. He had lost someone very important to him a long time ago, and had closed himself off from personal connections since then. His friends, worried about him, had staged an intervention of sorts, which had led to the blind date. 372 years is a long time, Clara said, referencing his earlier joke. Draven went very still. You remember that? It was a pretty specific number for a joke. What if it was not a joke? Clara's heart began to beat faster. Then I'd say you're either crazy, which I don't think you are, or you're telling me something impossible. The world is far stranger than most humans realize, Draven said quietly. There are things that live in the shadows, things that have existed for millennia, watching your civilizations rise and fall. Some of us try to remain separate. Others, his expression darkened, others prey upon humanity in ways both physical and political. Us, Clara repeated. You're including yourself in that. I am. The smart thing would have been to leave. To thank Draven for the lovely dinner, call a cab and never see him again. To tell Rachel about this conversation and laugh about dodging a bullet. But Clara had never been good at doing the smart thing when the interesting thing was right in front of her. Show me, she said instead. Clara, If you're telling me the truth, show me. If you're testing me or joking or whatever this is, fine. But if you're real, if this is real, I want to see. Draeven stood abruptly. Come with me. He paid the check with a black credit card that had no name on it and led Clara out to his car. They drove in silence for 20 minutes, leaving the city center behind, winding up into the hills where the houses grew larger and farther apart. Finally, Draeven turned down a private drive lined with old trees, driving for what felt like miles before a house came into view. Except house was a completely inadequate word. It was a mansion, all Gothic architecture and dark stone, lit by subtle lighting that made it look like something from another era. Draeven parked and came around to open Clara's door, helping her out. This is your home? One of them, Draeven said. The main estate is elsewhere, but I stay here when I have business in the city. He led her inside, through halls decorated with art that Clara suspected was not only original, but impossibly old. The furniture was antique, beautiful, and clearly well-maintained. Everything spoke of wealth and taste, accumulated over not decades but centuries. Draeven brought her to a library that made Clara's heart ache with longing. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, filled with books in dozens of languages. A fireplace at one end, leather chairs positioned for reading, ladders on rails to reach the higher shelves. "Oh my God," Clara breathed. "This is paradise." "I thought you would appreciate it," Draeven said softly. He moved to one shelf, pulled out a book bound in dark leather, and brought it to her. "This is a genealogy. My family's history." Clara opened it carefully. The pages were old, the writing in various hands across the centuries. She scanned the names, the dates, the intricate family tree that spanned page after page, and there she found it. Draeven Zalmisius, born 1632. No death date. She looked up at him, her hands shaking slightly. "This isn't possible." "I am vampire," Draeven said quietly. And with those 3 words, Clara's entire understanding of reality shifted. "I am king of the North Court, ruler of all vampire kind in this hemisphere. I have lived for nearly 4 centuries, and I will live for centuries more unless I am killed. I do not age. I do not sicken. I drink blood to survive, though I have never killed a human for it and never will. I am everything your nightmares tell you exists, and everything your rational mind says cannot be real." Clara sat down heavily in one of the leather chairs. Her mind was racing, trying to reconcile what Draeven was telling her with everything she knew about the world. But at the same time, everything clicked into place. The pallor, the cold, the way he moved, his knowledge of history, the formal speech patterns, the sensitivity to light. "Prove it," she whispered. Draeven knelt in front of her, bringing himself to her eye level. Slowly, carefully, he smiled, and Clara watched his teeth extend into wicked fangs. His eyes, already dark, seemed to deepen further, the pupils expanding until they were entirely black. The air around him grew colder, and Clara could suddenly sense something vast and powerful, contained within his human-seeming form. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. Draeven was simply a beautiful, nervous man kneeling before her, watching her with desperate hope and bone-deep fear of rejection. "I wanted to tell you from the beginning," he said, "but they advised against it. My friend said to wait to let you know me as simply a man first, but I cannot deceive you. I will not. If you wish to leave, I will take you home immediately. If you wish never to see me again, I will honor that. But I—" His voice cracked slightly. "I could not continue without telling you the truth. You deserve the truth." Clara's hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get away from the predator kneeling in front of her. But louder than the fear was something else, curiosity, wonder, and underneath it all, the undeniable pull she'd felt toward Draeven from the moment he'd walked into that café. "Vampires are real," she said, testing the words. "Yes. And you're their king. One of them. There are other courts, other rulers, but in this region, yes, I am king. Do you kill people?" "No." Draeven's answer was immediate and fierce. "I drink blood, yes, but I have extensive resources. Blood banks, donors who are willing and compensated, medical connections. I have not taken a life for sustenance in over 300 years, and I enforce the same laws upon those who serve me. But other vampires do kill. Draven's expression darkened. Some. The rogues, mostly. Those who refuse to join a court, who reject our laws. We hunt them. We stop them when we can. But there are many places where vampire law is far less humane. Clara processed this, her mind still reeling. Why tell me? We've been on 2 dates. You could have just kept seeing me without saying anything. Because I will not lie to you, Draven said with quiet intensity. And because if this continues, if we continue, you will eventually see things that would raise questions. My home, my habits, my world. I wanted you to have the choice, knowing everything, knowing what I am. What do you want from me? Clara asked. I do not know, Draven admitted. When my friends insisted I meet you, I expected an awkward evening and nothing more. I have not allowed myself to want anything beyond duty for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like. But then I saw you, Clara, and something that has been dead inside me for centuries began to wake. I do not expect you to understand. I do not expect you to accept any of this, but I wanted you to know. Clara stood and Draven rose with her, moving backward to give her space. She walked to the bookshelves, running her fingers along the spines, trying to ground herself in something solid while her worldview collapsed and reformed. I should be terrified, she said. You should, Draven agreed. I should leave and never look back. That would be wise, but I don't want to. Clara turned to face him. I don't know if that makes me brave or stupid, but I don't want to leave. I want to know more. I want to understand your world. She trailed off, unsure how to articulate the pull she felt. You want to keep seeing me, Draven said, and hope bloomed across his face like sunrise. Is that insane? Completely. He moved closer, slowly, like he was afraid of startling her. But I am glad. So very glad. They stood there for a moment, the weight of revelations hanging between them. Then Draven said, It is late. You should rest. Let me take you home. And tomorrow, if you still wish to continue this, if you have not woken and realized the sensible thing to do would be to run very far from me, I will answer any questions you have. Clara let him drive her home, her mind buzzing with 1,000 thoughts. At her apartment building, Draven walked her to the door with that same old-fashioned courtesy. Thank you, Clara said, for telling me, for trusting me. Thank you for not screaming, Draven replied with a hint of dark humor. It would not be the first time. Despite everything, Clara laughed. Then, impulsively, she stood on her toes and kissed his cheek. His skin was cool against her lips, smooth as marble and just as unyielding. Draven stood frozen, his eyes wide. When Clara pulled back, he was staring at her like she'd just performed a miracle. Good night, Draven. Good night, Clara Jenkins, he whispered. She watched him return to his car and drive away before heading upstairs. In her apartment, Clara sat on her couch for a long time, staring at nothing. Then she pulled out her phone and called Rachel. Okay, she said when Rachel answered. I need to tell you something, and you're going to think I'm crazy. By the time she finished explaining, Rachel was silent on the other end of the line. Rach? Say something. Simone told me there was something weird about that club, Rachel finally said. But I thought she meant like rich people weird, not vampire weird. You believe me? I don't know. This is insane, Clara, but also, I've been reading about weird stuff happening in the city. Unexplained attacks, people found drained of blood. The news calls them gang violence or animal attacks, but what if? She trailed off. What if there's a whole other world we don't know about? Draven says there is, Clara said. He says there are vampires and probably other things too, a whole hidden society. And he's their king. Apparently. Jesus. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Are you okay? Like, really okay? Because if you need me to come get you, if you're scared... I'm not scared, Clara interrupted. I mean, I should be, but I'm not. He's been nothing but honest and careful with me. And Rachel, I really like him. The Vampire King. The Vampire King. Rachel laughed, slightly hysterical. Your life is so much more interesting than mine. Clara spent the next day in a daze, going through the motions at work while her mind spun with everything Draven had told her. She kept pulling out her phone, looking at his messages, wondering if she'd imagined the entire thing. But no, it was real. Vampires were real. And she was dating one. Draven texted around noon, asking if she would like to visit him that evening. Clara agreed, and after work she drove herself to the mansion, following the directions he'd sent. The drive was less intimidating in daylight, and Clara could see the estate more clearly. It was even more impressive than she'd realized. Acres of property, gardens that must have required a full-time staff, and the house itself rising like something from a Gothic novel. Draven met her at the door. He was wearing a simple white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and Clara was struck again by how beautiful he was. Inhuman beauty, she now understood, the product of centuries and supernatural power. "Thank you for coming," he said, ushering her inside. "I was not certain you would." "I almost didn't," Clara admitted. "I almost convinced myself it was all a dream or a delusion. But then I realized I wanted it to be real. I wanted you to be real." Something intense flashed across Draven's face. He led her back to the library, where he'd set out tea and small sandwiches. Again, nothing for himself. "Ask me anything," Draven said, settling into one of the chairs across from her. "I will hide nothing from you." Clara had so many questions she barely knew where to start. But she began with the practical. How do you drink blood without killing? "Modern medicine has made it far simpler," Draven explained. "I have arrangements with several blood banks. I pay well for access to their stores. I also have a network of willing donors who are compensated and whose health I monitor carefully. A vampire needs perhaps a liter every few days, less if we are not expending much energy. It is not as difficult as one might think to obtain blood ethically." "But other vampires don't bother," Draven's expression hardened. "Many do not. The old ways die hard, and there are those who believe humans are simply cattle. I have fought against that mentality for my entire reign, but I cannot control every vampire in existence, only those within my territory who choose to accept my rule." "How many vampires are there?" "In my court? Perhaps 500. In the world, tens of thousands, maybe more. We do not exactly census ourselves. Many live in isolation, appearing only to feed and then vanishing again. Others form small groups, covens, or packs. The courts are the largest organizations, and there are 6 major ones across the globe. And you're in charge of one of them. I am. The North Court, which governs most of North America and parts of Europe. It was not a position I sought, but one I inherited when my predecessor was removed." "Removed?" "Killed," Draven said bluntly. "He was cruel, sadistic, turning humans for sport and letting his court feed indiscriminately. There was a rebellion. I led it. And when he was destroyed, the court chose me to lead." Clara processed this. "How old were you?" 73. Still young for a vampire. But I had been a soldier before my turning, and I had connections. The court believed I could bring order. I have tried." They talked for hours. Draven told her about his human life, born in the 1600s to a minor noble family, trained as a military officer, turned during a battle by a vampire who thought he showed promise. He described the early years of confusion and horror, learning to control the hunger, watching everyone he'd known grow old and die. He spoke of the long centuries, the changes he'd witnessed, the loneliness of immortality. "Do you ever wish you were human again?" Clara asked. "Every day," Draven said quietly. "And never. I have power I could never have dreamed of as a human. I have time to learn, to grow, to master arts and sciences. But I have also lost everyone I ever cared about. I've watched the world change in ways both beautiful and terrible. And I am so very tired, Clara, so tired of ruling, of politics, of pretending to be above the loneliness." Without thinking, Clara reached across and took his hand. His skin was cool, but his fingers curled around hers with desperate strength. "I see you," she said softly. "Not the king, just you, Draven, the man who was nervous in a café, who loves books and history, who has tried for centuries to do the right thing. I see you." Draven's eyes glistened, and Clara realized with shock that he was close to tears. "No one has seen me as simply myself in longer than I can remember." "Then they're all idiots." A laugh broke from Draven, surprised and genuine. He raised Clara's hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was courtly, old-fashioned, and it made Clara's heart race. "You are extraordinary," Draven murmured, "brave and kind and far too good for a creature like me." "Let me decide that," Clara said. Over the next few weeks, Clara found herself pulled deeper into Draven's world. He introduced her to his closest advisors, the vampires who helped him run the court. There was Lysander, his second in command, a tall vampire with silver hair and sharp eyes who regarded Clara with undisguised suspicion. Seraphine, who managed communications and intelligence, beautiful and deadly with hair like spun moonlight, and Constantine, the youngest of the group at barely 200 years old, who seemed delighted that Draven had finally found someone. They met in the mansion's lower levels, in rooms that Clara realized formed an entire hidden complex beneath the house. Council chambers, sleeping quarters for vampires who couldn't risk daylight travel, and what Draven called the Hall of Records, where the history of vampire kind was meticulously documented. "You cannot tell anyone about this," Lysander said sternly during their first meeting. "Vampire secrecy has been maintained for millennia. If humans learned the truth, there would be panic," Clara finished. "I understand. I'm not going to run to the news." "See that you don't," Lysander said coldly. "Because if you endanger this court, endanger our king, I will not hesitate to—" "Lysander." Draven's voice was quiet but carried unmistakable authority. "You will not threaten Clara, ever. Am I clear?" The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Lysander stared at Draven, something passing between them that Clara couldn't read. Finally, Lysander bowed his head. "As you command, my king." But Clara could feel his hostility even as he retreated. "He doesn't trust me," she said later, when she and Draven were alone. "He does not trust anyone," Draven corrected. "It is what makes him an excellent second but a difficult friend. He will come around." "And if he doesn't?" Draven's expression was firm. "Then he will learn to accept it. You are important to me, Clara, more important than I expected anyone could be again. I will not let anyone, not even Lysander, drive you away." The protectiveness in his voice sent a shiver through Clara. She was falling for him, she realized, falling hard for a vampire king who looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his ancient world. But not everything was romantic dinners and library conversations. Clara quickly learned that Draven's position came with serious dangers. One night, she was at the mansion when alarms suddenly blared through the building. Draven moved with inhuman speed, pulling Clara into a protected room before she could even ask what was happening. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice taking on a tone she'd never heard before. Pure authority, the voice of a king. "Do not leave until I come for you." "What's happening?" "Rogues." His eyes had gone completely black, his fangs extended. "They are attacking the border of my territory. I must deal with them." He was gone before Clara could protest. Moving so fast he was just a blur. Clara was left alone in the secure room, heart pounding, wondering what she'd gotten herself into. It was 3 hours before Draven returned. When he did, there was blood on his clothes and his expression was grim. Clara rushed to him, checking for injuries, but he caught her hands. "Not my blood," he said quietly. "I am unhurt. But there were casualties. 3 of my court members are injured. One of the rogues escaped." "What did they want?" "To challenge my rule. To prove that the North Court is weak, that my laws about not killing humans are making us vulnerable." Draven's expression was anguished. "They killed 2 humans tonight, Clara. Drained them and left them in the street as a message. I have failed to protect—" "Stop." Clara cupped his face, forcing him to look at her. "You cannot control every vampire. You cannot be everywhere at once. You're doing everything you can. It is not enough. It will never be enough." Clara pulled him down into a kiss, desperate to comfort him, to remind him that he wasn't alone. Draven froze for a moment, then responded with a hunger that had nothing to do with blood. His arms wrapped around her, holding her close, and Clara could feel the supernatural strength in him, carefully controlled so as not to hurt her. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Draven rested his forehead against hers. "You should not be here," he whispered. "It is too dangerous. If those rogues had breached the mansion, if they had found you, but they didn't. But they could have. Clara, there are vampires who would hurt you just to strike at me, who would use you as leverage or worse. I cannot lose you. I cannot." The raw emotion in his voice made Clara's eyes sting with tears. "Then we'll be careful. We'll make sure I'm protected. But I'm not leaving you, Draven. I'm not running just because this is complicated and dangerous." "You should." "Well, I won't." Draven pulled back to look at her, his expression a mixture of wonder and despair. How did I find you? After centuries of emptiness, how did you walk into my life? Meddling friends, Clara said, trying to lighten the mood. On both sides. That earned her a small smile. Remind me to thank them. And then, to kill them for putting you in danger. After that night, security around Clara increased dramatically. Draven assigned Constantine to be her guard, which meant the young vampire was suddenly a constant presence in her life. He drove her to work, waited outside the library, escorted her home. It should have been intrusive, but Constantine was charming and funny, treating the assignment less like a chore and more like an adventure. I have been with the court for 50 years, he told Clara one evening while driving her to meet Draven for dinner, and I have never seen the king like this. So, human. Is that bad? It is wonderful, Constantine said sincerely. He has carried the weight of leadership for so long, been so closed off from genuine connection. You make him happy, Clara. That is worth protecting. Even though I'm human, especially because you are human. Constantine glanced at her. You remind him of what we all once were, of the fragility and beauty of mortal life. He needs that reminder. Clara was beginning to understand the complexity of Draven's world. The court wasn't just about power and politics. It was about survival, about maintaining the delicate balance between vampire nature and the necessity of hiding from humanity. Draven bore the responsibility for hundreds of vampires, making decisions about territories, feeding rights, disputes, and enforcement of laws that kept his people from drawing unwanted attention. She saw him in council meetings, his demeanor completely transformed from the nervous man in the café. Here, he was commanding, decisive, every inch the king. He listened to arguments, weighed options, and made rulings with a firmness that brooked no argument. Even Lysander, for all his hostility toward Clara, clearly respected and obeyed Draven without question. But in private, Draven was softer. He took Clara through his gardens at night, showing her flowers that bloomed in moonlight. He read to her from ancient texts, translating long dead languages on the fly. He told her stories of history from the perspective of someone who'd lived through it, making the past come alive in ways no textbook ever could. And slowly, carefully, they grew closer. Draven was endlessly patient, never pushing for more than Clara was ready to give. But Clara could feel the tension building between them, the desire that simmered beneath every touch, every kiss. I want you, Draven admitted one night, his voice rough. They were in the library, Clara curled against his side on one of the sofas. I want you in ways I have not wanted anyone in centuries, but I am afraid. Of what? Of hurting you, of losing control. My strength, Clara, I could break you so easily, and when I'm aroused, the hunger rises too. I could not bear it if I harmed you. Clara turned in his arms, looking up at him. You won't. I trust you. You should not. Stop telling me what I should do, Clara said with a hint of frustration. I'm an adult. I know the risks, and I still want this. I want you. The war in Draven's expression was painful to watch. Desire, fighting with fear, want battling with the deep-seated conviction that he was too dangerous for her. Finally, he closed his eyes. Not yet, he said hoarsely. Please, Clara, give me time. Let me be certain I can control myself around you. I could not live with myself if I hurt you. Clara wanted to argue, but she could see how genuinely afraid he was. So she just held him, and they stayed like that, wrapped in each other. The hunger between them a living thing neither was quite ready to address. The next crisis came 2 weeks later. Clara was at work, shelving books in the history section, when Constantine suddenly appeared in the aisle. His expression was grim. We need to leave, now. What? Why? Because there is a vampire in this building, and it is not one of ours. Fear spiked through Clara. She followed Constantine quickly through the library, trying not to draw attention. But before they reached the exit, a figure stepped into their path. The vampire was male, dark-haired, with the same pale skin and inhuman beauty that marked Draven's kind. But where Draven's eyes held warmth and age-old sadness, this vampire's eyes were cold, predatory. Leaving so soon, he said, his voice carrying a mocking lilt. I was hoping we could chat. You must be the human who has caught our king's attention. Who are you? Constantine demanded, positioning himself between Clara and the stranger. Marius, the vampire said with a mocking bow, emissary from the South Court, we have heard such interesting rumors about the great Draeven Zalmysius falling for a mortal girl. My queen wishes to extend her congratulations and perhaps an invitation. We have no interest in your queen's invitations, Constantine said coldly. Ah, but you should. Marius's eyes fixed on Clara, and she felt pinned by that gaze, like prey under a predator's attention. The South Court finds the North Court's policies about humans rather quaint. We wondered if perhaps the king's new pet might be interested in seeing how the other courts operate. I'm not anyone's pet, Clara said, proud that her voice didn't shake. Marius smiled, showing fangs. No? Then what are you? A snack he is saving for later? An amusement? Surely you do not believe the king actually cares for you. Vampires do not love humans, girl. We use them. That's enough. Constantine's voice was deadly quiet. Leave, now, or I will be forced to inform our king that the South Court has violated our territory and threatened what is under his protection. Something dangerous flashed across Marius's face. For a moment, Clara thought he might attack. Then he smiled again, all false charm. Very well. But do think about my queen's invitation, little human. She could show you such wonders, such power, and unlike your king, she would not pretend you are anything more than what you are. Food with a pretty face. He was gone between one blink and the next, moving with that impossible vampire speed. Constantine immediately pulled out his phone, already dialing as he hurried Clara out of the library. We have a problem, he said when someone answered. Then, no, she is safe. But we were approached by a vampire from the South Court. Marius. Clara could hear shouting from the phone, multiple voices, and Constantine's expression grew more worried. They reached his car, and he practically shoved Clara inside before speeding toward the mansion. When they arrived, the entire court seemed to be in an uproar. Vampires moved through the halls with purposeful urgency, and in the main council chamber, Draeven stood at the center of a group of his advisors, his expression thunderous. The moment he saw Clara, relief broke across his face. He crossed the room in an instant, pulling her into his arms with a force that would have been bruising if he hadn't carefully controlled his strength. You are unharmed, he demanded, pulling back to check her over. I'm fine. Constantine got me out before anything happened. Marius did not touch you? No, he just talked, made threats, said his queen wanted to meet me. A ripple of reaction went through the assembled vampires. Lysander looked furious, Seraphine calculating, and several others seemed worried. The South Court makes its move, Lysander said grimly. They are testing you, my king, testing how far they can push before you respond. They threatened Clara, Draeven said, his voice dropping to a tone that made the air feel heavy. That is not a test, that is an act of war. We cannot go to war over a human, one of the other vampires protested. The cost. The temperature in the room plummeted. Draeven turned to the speaker, and Clara saw the full weight of his power unleashed for the first time. His eyes were completely black, his presence seeming to expand until he appeared larger, more, an ancient predator in human skin. Clara is under my protection, Draeven said, each word precisely enunciated. She is mine. Any threat to her is a threat to me, and I will burn the South Court to ash before I let them touch her. Am I understood? Complete silence. Every vampire in the room had bowed their heads, unable to meet their king's gaze. Yes, my king, they chorused. The power receded slowly. Draeven turned back to Clara, his expression softening. I'm sorry. You should not have been exposed to court politics. I should have protected you better. You couldn't have known they'd come to my work. I should have anticipated it. The South Court has always been bold, and their queen, Morgana, has long resented my position. She will use you to strike at me if she can. Then tell me how to protect myself, Clara said firmly. Teach me about your world, about the dangers. Let me make informed choices instead of just reacting to threats. Draeven studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well, but you will not like what you learn. He was right. Over the next few days, Clara learned the darker truths about vampire society. The South Court, ruled by Queen Morgana, operated on very different principles than Draeven's North Court. They made no attempt to hide their feeding from their victims. often leaving bodies or traumatized survivors. They turned humans freely, creating new vampires without regard for their adjustment or consent. And they had significant political power, controlling businesses and even some human governments through manipulation and fear. "Why haven't you stopped them?" Clara asked after one particularly disturbing briefing. "Because I cannot," Draeven said, frustration clear in his voice. "Each court is sovereign within its territory. I can enforce my laws within the North Court, but I cannot dictate to other rulers how they govern their own. To do so would start a war that could expose all of vampire kind to humanity. The balance is delicate, Clara. I walk a constant line between enforcing my principles and avoiding catastrophic conflict. But Morgana is coming for you. For us. She has always wanted to expand her influence, and now I have given her an opening by caring for you so publicly." Draeven took Clara's hands. "I will not let her harm you. I swear it on my existence, but I need you to be careful. No going anywhere alone. Always have Constantine or another guard with you, and if you see any vampire you do not recognize, run." Clara agreed, though the restrictions chafed. She hated feeling like a target, like bait in a game of vampire politics. But she also understood the danger was real. The attack came 3 days later. Clara was leaving the library after work, Constantine escorting her as always. They were halfway to the car when 5 vampires materialized out of the shadows. Not Marius this time, but others, their eyes hungry, their movements coordinated. Constantine shoved Clara behind him, his fangs extending. "Run!" he shouted, but there was nowhere to run. The vampires had them surrounded. Clara watched in horror as Constantine fought, moving with blinding speed, but he was outnumbered. One vampire broke through his defense, heading straight for Clara. She screamed, stumbling backward. The vampire grabbed her, his grip like iron, lifting her off her feet. His face was twisted with hunger and malice, fangs glistening. "The king will learn the price of defying the South Court," he hissed. Then his head exploded. Clara fell, hitting the pavement hard. Draeven stood where the vampire had been, his hand still extended, dripping with blood and gore. His expression was something from nightmares, all predatory rage and ancient power. The remaining vampires froze. One tried to run. Draeven caught him before he'd made it 3 steps, ripping him apart with his bare hands. The violence was horrific, primal, and over in seconds. The last 2 vampires dropped to their knees, begging for mercy. Draeven ignored them, crossing to Clara and gathering her into his arms. "Are you hurt?" His voice shook. "Did they harm you?" "I'm okay," Clara managed, though she was shaking. "Constantine, I will live," Constantine said, though he was bleeding from several wounds. "Forgive me, my king. I failed to protect her." "You kept her alive long enough for me to arrive," Draeven said. "That is all I asked." He turned to the 2 surviving vampires, and his voice went cold. "You will return to Morgana. You will tell her that she has made a grave mistake. Tell her that I am coming. Tell her that the North Court declares itself her enemy and that I will not stop until she answers for this attack on what is mine." "My king," Lysander's voice came from the darkness. He emerged with a dozen more vampires, all armed. "The South Court force retreated as soon as you arrived, but this was a coordinated attack. They had vampires positioned throughout the city." "Then we go to war," Draeven said simply. "Gather the court, send messages to our allies. Morgana has forced my hand, and I will show her the error of underestimating the North." Clara watched as Draeven transformed before her eyes from the gentle, scholarly man she knew into something else entirely. A warrior king, ancient and terrible, rallying his people for battle. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt a fierce surge of pride. This was the man who had survived centuries, who had built his court on principles of restraint and honor. And he was going to war to protect her. The mansion became a war room overnight. Vampires flooded in from across the territory, answering their king's call. Clara found herself moved to the most secure areas of the complex, surrounded by guards at all times. Draeven barely left the council chambers, planning strategy with his generals. When he finally came to see her, 2 days after the attack, he looked exhausted. Vampires didn't need sleep the way humans did, but Clara had learned they could still tire, especially when expending significant power. "I am sorry," he said, collapsing into the chair beside her. "I am sorry for bringing this into your life, for making you a target." "Don't apologize for caring about me," Clara said. This isn't your fault. It's Morgana's. I should have hidden my feelings better. Kept you secret. Would that have made you happy? Draven looked at her and his expression crumbled. No, you are the only thing that has made me happy in centuries. But I would give up that happiness to know you were safe. Clara moved to kneel in front of him, taking his hands. What if I don't want you to give it up? What if I choose this, danger and all? Then you are far braver than I deserve. Or maybe I just love you, Clara said. The words hung in the air. She hadn't planned to say them, but once they were out, Clara knew they were true. She loved this ancient, complicated vampire king with all his power and vulnerability. Draven stared at her, something breaking in his expression. You cannot love me, he whispered. I'm a monster. I've killed Clara, centuries of blood on my hands. You're also the man who tried to order tea in a café because he was nervous, who reads to me in dead languages and takes me to see night-blooming flowers, who has spent hundreds of years trying to protect humans from his own kind. I love all of you, Draven, the king and the man. A sound escaped Draven that might have been a sob. He pulled Clara into his lap, holding her with desperate strength, his face buried in her hair. I love you, he said brokenly. I love you so much it terrifies me. I would destroy the world to keep you safe. They held each other as the war preparations continued around them. And for that moment, they were just two people who had found something precious in each other, determined not to let it go. The confrontation with the South Court came sooner than expected. Morgana, enraged by Draven's declaration of war, decided to force a meeting. She sent a formal challenge, demanding that Draven meet her in neutral territory with terms for ending the conflict. It is a trap, Lysander said immediately. She will try to kill you. Undoubtedly, Draven agreed, but if I refuse, she will see it as weakness, and the attack on Clara will be just the beginning. Then we come with overwhelming force, Seraphine suggested. Show her that the North Court is not to be trifled with. They planned carefully. Draven would meet Morgana with his full council and a significant military presence. Clara was to remain at the mansion, protected by a substantial guard. Draven was adamant about this, and for once Clara didn't argue. She understood that her presence would just be a liability in whatever confrontation was coming. The night before the meeting, Draven came to Clara's room. He looked regal in dark formal wear, every inch the king, but his eyes were troubled. If something happens to me, he began. Nothing's going to happen to you. If it does, Draven continued firmly, Lysander will take control of the court. He will ensure you are protected and provided for. I have made arrangements. I don't want your arrangements, Clara said, fear making her voice sharp. I want you to come back. Draven crossed to her, cupping her face with both hands. I will do everything in my power to return to you, but Morgana is ancient and powerful. I must be prepared for any possibility. Then prepare for us to have a future, Clara said. Prepare to come back to me and continue whatever this is between us. Prepare to show me more of your world. Prepare for tomorrow and the day after and the century after that. You would stay with me, knowing what I am, knowing what my life entails? I would stay with you if you were human or vampire or anything else, Clara said. I love you, Draven. That doesn't change based on circumstances. Draven kissed her then, deep and desperate, pouring centuries of loneliness and longing into the contact. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. When I return, Draven said hoarsely, I would like to discuss your future, our future. There are ways, if you wanted, you could choose to become like me. Clara's heart skipped. You'd turn me? Only if you wished it, only if you understood fully what it would mean. But yes, I would give you eternity if you wanted it, if you wanted me for that long. Let's survive tonight first, Clara said, though her mind was spinning with possibilities. Then we can talk about forever. Draven left an hour later, taking most of the court with him. Clara was left in the mansion with a dozen guards, all of them tense and alert. She tried to read to distract herself, but her mind kept drifting to Draven, wondering what was happening, if he was safe. The guards' phones all went off simultaneously around midnight. Clara watched as expressions shifted from alert to alarmed. One of them, a female vampire named Helena, approached her. There is a problem, Helena said carefully. The meeting has gone badly. There was a fight. The king is alive but injured. They are returning. How bad? Bad enough that he asked us to prepare the medical facilities. Fear clutched at Clara's chest. She followed Helena down to the lower levels, to rooms she'd never seen before. Medical equipment, blood banks, spaces clearly designed for treating injured vampires. Within 20 minutes, cars were screaming up the drive. Lysander entered first, his face grim. Behind him came Constantine and Seraphine, supporting Draven between them. The king's shirt was shredded, soaked with blood. His face was pale even for a vampire, his movements weak. "What happened?" Clara demanded, rushing forward. "Morgana came with a force 3 times what we expected," Lysander said. "And she had a witch with her, someone who specializes in anti-vampire magic. She caught our king off guard." They laid Draven on one of the medical tables. Clara pushed past the vampires surrounding him, taking his hand. His eyes opened, unfocused, landing on her. "Clara," he whispered, "you're safe." "I'm fine. You're the one who's hurt." "Morgana escaped," Draven said, frustration clear even through his pain. "We destroyed most of her force, but she got away. She will try again." "Then we'll be ready," Clara said firmly. "But first we get you healed." The doctors, both vampire and human specialists that Draven kept on retainer, worked quickly. Vampire healing was fast, but whatever magic had been used on Draven had slowed the process. It took hours of treatment, blood transfusions, and careful monitoring before he was stable. Clara never left his side. She held his hand, spoke to him when he was conscious, and refused to move even when Lysander suggested she rest. Finally, as dawn approached, Draven's eyes opened fully, clarity returning. "You should not be here," he said, but his hand tightened on hers. "Where else would I be?" "Safe, away from this war I have brought upon us." "This war that Morgana started," Clara corrected. "You're just finishing it." Over the next week, the conflict escalated. There were skirmishes across the territory, vampire fighting vampire. Draven, healed enough to lead again, directed his forces with strategic precision. But Morgana was cunning, striking at unexpected targets, using human casualties to draw Draven's forces into traps. "She is trying to make me choose," Draven said one night, studying maps in the war room. "Force me to either abandon my principles about protecting humans or spread my forces too thin defending them." "Then we need to end this quickly," Seraphine said. "Take the fight to her directly." "She is too well protected in her own territory." "What if we drew her out?" Clara said suddenly. All the vampires turned to look at her. "I mean, I'm what started this, right? She wanted to use me against you. What if we let her think she can?" "Absolutely not," Draven said immediately. "Hear me out. What if we set a trap? Make it look like I'm vulnerable, like she could grab me, and when she comes for me, you're waiting." "You want to use yourself as bait," Lysander said, and for the first time, there was something like respect in his voice. "I want to end this before more people die," Clara said, "human or vampire." The argument that followed was intense. Draven refused outright, unwilling to put Clara in danger. But Clara was stubborn, and eventually, the strategic advantages won out. If they could lure Morgana into attacking, into leaving the safety of her own territory, they could end the war in one strike. They planned carefully. Clara would appear to leave the mansion, traveling to her apartment with only minimal guard. Intelligence suggested that Morgana had spies watching the estate. If they saw the king's beloved human vulnerable, they would report back. And Morgana, arrogant and hungry for victory, would likely come herself. The night of the trap, Clara dressed in normal clothes, trying to appear casual despite the fear churning in her stomach. Constantine would drive her, with Draven and the main force following at a distance, ready to spring the trap. "If anything goes wrong," Draven said, pulling Clara aside before they left, "you run. Do not try to be brave. Do not try to fight. You run and you let us handle Morgana." "I will," Clara promised. "I mean it, Clara. I cannot lose you. I will not survive it." She kissed him, trying to pour all her love and confidence into it. "You won't lose me. This is going to work." The drive into the city was tense. Constantine kept checking the mirrors, his hands tight on the wheel. They were halfway to Clara's apartment when he suddenly swore. "They are here. Multiple vampires closing fast." "How many?" "At least 10, and—" His face went pale. "Morgana is with them." Fear spiked through Clara, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Can we make it to the apartment?" "We can try." They sped up, weaving through traffic. But the pursuing vampires were faster, running alongside and jumping between buildings. One landed on the hood of the car, and Constantine swerved violently, throwing it off. They were 3 blocks from Clara's apartment when Morgana herself appeared in the middle of the road. Constantine slammed on the brakes, the car skidding. And then, the South Court Queen was ripping the door off its hinges, reaching for Clara with hands that ended in claws. Constantine fought valiantly, throwing himself between Clara and Morgana, but the Queen backhanded him so hard he flew 20 feet, hitting a wall and going limp. Then, Morgana had Clara by the throat, lifting her effortlessly. Finally, Morgana purred. The little human who thinks she can love a vampire, let us see what your king will sacrifice to get you back. Then, Draeven was there. Moving so fast Clara barely saw him. He hit Morgana like a freight train, the impact sending both of them crashing through the wall of a nearby building. The Queen's grip on Clara loosened, and Clara fell, hitting the pavement hard. The fight that followed was terrifying. Draeven and Morgana moved at speeds impossible to track, their impacts shaking the ground. Other vampires poured in, North Court fighting south, the street becoming a war zone. Clara scrambled toward where Constantine lay, checking for a pulse. He was alive, unconscious but healing. She dragged him into cover behind a car and looked up to see Draeven and Morgana locked in combat. The Queen was laughing, her beautiful face twisted with malice. You have gone soft, Draeven. Love has made you weak. Love has made me strong, Draeven snarled, and there was something different in him now, a ferocity Clara hadn't seen before. Strong enough to end you. Their next clash sent out a shockwave that shattered windows. Morgana conjured dark magic, bolts of shadow that Draeven barely dodged, but he was faster, more skilled, and slowly he drove her back. Lysander appeared at Clara's side, checking on Constantine. The boy will survive, and our king is winning. Indeed, Draeven had Morgana on the defensive now. She tried to flee, but Draeven caught her, his hand closing around her throat. You threatened what is mine, Draeven said, his voice carrying across the battlefield. You killed innocents. You started a war you could not win, and now you will face justice. You cannot kill me, Morgana gasped. I am a queen. The South Court will rise against you. Then they will fall too, Draeven said coldly, and he tore her head from her shoulders. The sudden death of their queen sent the South Court vampires into chaos. Some fled, others surrendered. Within minutes, the battle was over, and Draeven stood in the center of the carnage, covered in blood, his eyes scanning for Clara. She stood, and he was beside her in an instant, his hands running over her, checking for injuries. I am unharmed, Clara assured him. Constantine protected me. I will owe him a debt I can never repay, Draeven said. Then he just held her, uncaring of the blood, the watching vampires, the devastation around them. It is over. You are safe. It is over. The aftermath of the war took weeks to settle. The South Court, leaderless and broken, eventually submitted to the North Court's authority. Draeven installed new leadership, vampires he trusted to enforce laws that protected humans. There were reparations to be made, alliances to rebuild, and a whole new political structure to establish. Through it all, Clara was at his side. The court came to accept her presence, even Lysander eventually thawing enough to offer her grudging approval. She became a fixture at the mansion, learning about vampire politics and culture, offering her perspective as a human in a world of immortals. 3 months after Morgana's death, Draeven came to Clara with a serious expression. They were in the library, their favorite place, surrounded by books and the quiet comfort of knowledge. I want to ask you something, he said, and I need you to think carefully before answering. Clara set down the book she'd been reading. Okay? I love you, Clara Jenkins. I love you more than I thought it possible to love anyone, and I want to spend the rest of my existence with you. He took her hands. But my existence is eternal, and yours is not. We have perhaps 60 years together if we are fortunate, a blink of an eye for me, a lifetime for you. You want to turn me, Clara said. I want to offer you the choice, Draeven corrected, to become vampire, to share eternity with me, to never grow old or die. But I need you to understand what you would be giving up. The sunlight, normal food, the possibility of children, a natural death, your humanity. Clara had thought about this constantly since Draeven first mentioned it. She'd researched vampire turning, asked questions of court members, tried to understand fully what it would mean. "Can I ask you something first?" she said. "Anything. Do you want me to choose this because you genuinely want to share forever with me, or because you can't bear the thought of losing me?" Draven considered carefully. "Both," he admitted. "I am selfish, Clara. I want you with me always, but I also believe we could build something beautiful together. You could learn and grow and experience things across centuries. We could travel the world, see history unfold. You could be not just my partner but my queen, helping me lead the court, bridging the gap between vampire and human understanding." "Your queen," Clara repeated softly. "Clara, if you wanted, if you chose to join me in this life." Draven's expression was vulnerable, hopeful, and terrified all at once. "I am not offering you an easy path, but I'm offering you everything I have and everything I am for as long as existence itself lasts." Clara thought about her human life, her job at the library, her apartment, her friends who she'd been slowly drifting from as she spent more time in Draven's world. She thought about growing old while Draven stayed forever young, about dying and leaving him to face eternity alone again. And she thought about forever, about centuries of learning and growth, about standing beside Draven as he led his people, helping him build a world where vampire and human could coexist, about the love that had grown between them, a love that transcended species and time itself. "Yes," she said simply, "I choose you. I choose this. I choose forever." The relief and joy on Draven's face was radiant. He pulled her close, kissing her deeply. "Are you certain? You do not have to decide now. We can wait." "I'm certain," Clara interrupted. "I love you, Draven, and I want every moment with you that existence will allow." The turning happened a week later, after Clara had settled her human affairs. She'd quit her job, donated most of her possessions, and said careful goodbyes to Rachel and Simone without explaining the full truth. They knew she was moving in with Draven, starting a new life, but they couldn't know about the vampire part. That secret would have to remain. The night of the turning, the entire court gathered. This was apparently a significant event, the king taking a mate and turning a human. Clara dressed in a simple white gown, feeling like she was attending her own wedding and funeral simultaneously. Draven met her in the great hall, looking regal in formal black. The court stood in attendance, witnesses to what was about to happen. "The turning is painful," Draven explained quietly, "for perhaps the 10th time. Your body will die and be reborn. It will feel like you are burning from the inside, but I will be with you through all of it. And when you wake, you will be vampire. You will be mine, and I will be yours for all of eternity." "I'm ready," Clara said, and she was. Draven led her to a prepared chamber, private and away from the court. He laid her on a soft bed, then knelt beside her. "I love you," he said. "Remember that. Through the pain, through the change, remember that I love you." Then he bit her, his fangs sinking into her throat, and Clara's world exploded into sensation. The pain came in waves, worse than anything she'd imagined. Fire in her veins, her body convulsing, her heart racing, and then slowing, and then stopping altogether. Through it all, Draven held her, whispered to her, gave her his blood to complete the transformation. And slowly the pain receded, replaced by a strange clarity. Her senses sharpened, the world coming into focus in ways she'd never experienced. She could hear everything, smell everything, feel the supernatural power awakening in her cells. When she finally opened her eyes, the world looked different. Colors were more vivid, sounds more distinct. And Draven, kneeling beside her, was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen, not just physically, but the glow of his presence, the depth of his soul, everything about him magnified and clear. "Clara?" His voice was anxious. "How do you feel?" "Hungry," she admitted, and she was. A hunger unlike anything her human body had ever known, a craving that demanded blood. Draven smiled and offered her a bag of blood from the medical stores. Clara drank, the taste strange but satisfying, feeling the hunger ease. And as she fed, she felt Draven's hand in hers, his presence a steady anchor. When she finished, she looked at him. "Is it always this intense? The hunger?" "At first, yes, you will learn control. I will teach you everything you need to know." Clara looked down at her hands, now pale as Draven's, her skin taking on that luminous vampire quality. Her hair was already lightening, shifting toward the white blonde of her new nature. She was changing, becoming something other than human. And she felt wonderful. "Welcome to eternity," Draven said softly, pulling her into his arms. "My love, my mate, my queen." The months that followed were an adjustment. Clara had to learn to control her new strength, her speed, her hunger. Draven was patient, teaching her everything, introducing her properly to court society not as a human curiosity, but as his chosen mate, a vampire in her own right. The court accepted her with surprising warmth. Even Lysander bowed to her now, acknowledging her position. Clara found she had a talent for diplomacy, for understanding both the vampire and human perspectives, and she began working with Draven on policies to improve relations between the two worlds. They established new feeding protocols, expanded the blood bank programs, and began quietly reaching out to human governments with carefully limited revelations about vampire existence. It was dangerous, delicate work, but Clara threw herself into it with passion. At night, when the work was done, she and Draven would retreat to their private quarters. They made love with the passion of two people who'd found each other against impossible odds, vampire and former human, king and queen, two souls bound for eternity. One night, a year after Clara's turning, they stood on the balcony of the mansion, looking out over the city. Clara's hand was in Draven's, her head on his shoulder. "Do you regret it?" Draven asked softly. "Giving up your humanity?" Clara considered the question seriously. She thought about sunlight, which she could no longer enjoy, about simple human foods she could no longer eat, about the friends she'd had to leave behind, who would age and die while she remained forever young. But then she thought about Draven, his love, constant and true, about the work they were doing together, building a better world for both vampire and human, about the centuries stretching ahead, full of possibility and growth. "Not for a second," she said honestly. "This is exactly where I'm meant to be." Draven pulled her close, kissing her temple. "I spent 372 years alone, convinced I would never find love again. And then you walked into that café and everything changed." "I spent 30 years thinking life was ordinary, predictable," Clara replied, "never guessing that a shy man at a blind date would turn out to be a vampire king, never imagining I'd find love in the darkness, eternal and true." "To friends who meddle," Draven said with a soft laugh. "To blind dates and impossible love," Clara added. They kissed as the moon rose over the city, two vampires bound by choice and love, facing forever together. The world below continued its normal rhythm, most of humanity never knowing about the supernatural society living alongside them, never knowing about the vampire king who'd found redemption in loving a human woman brave enough to love him back. And in the shadows of the mansion, surrounded by centuries of history and the promise of eternity, Clara and Draven began the next chapter of their impossible, beautiful forever.